All right, good morning and welcome to Drop Site News. I'm Ryan Grimm. On the back half of the show this morning, we're going to be joined by Asem Alnabih, a journalist in northern Gaza. He'll be talking about the deteriorating weather conditions there and what that's doing to life under this ongoing siege. And we'll also talk about what type of life essentials are being allowed into Gaza at this point and what aren't, and what the result of that is. Right before that, I'll be joined by my drop site colleague, Murtaza Hussain, and we're going to talk about some of the reporting that we've been doing on Jeffrey Epstein and his ties to various intelligence agencies here in the United States and also in Israel. But first, and we're going to be joined by Erik Sperling with Just Foreign Policy, who is one of these guys who's up on Capitol Hill constantly, kind of just doing the Lord's work, dealing with the swamp. Oftentimes in coalition with, let's say, populist, right-wing, kind of isolationist tendencies, trying to piece together enough votes to kind of stop the establishment war machine from just carrying on its business. You've been doing that with a Venezuelan war powers resolution, which we want to get into kind of later in this interview, because you're seeing some movement on that on the House, an attempt to pass a resolution that would block the Trump administration from waging an illegal war in Venezuela. You're seeing Chuck Schumer on the Democratic side saying, we'll do it the second he invades, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, because that kind of defeats the purpose, but I'll get you to unpack that. But what's going on now in Washington, for people who are lucky enough to not have to care, is the NDAA. This is a 3,000 plus page bill, the National Defense Authorization Act, which is a kind of annual event here in Washington because it is considered what's called a, quote, must-pass piece of legislation. Like, Congress has decided they must pass this thing. The government has decided they must pass it. So they've all agreed we must pass this thing. That means something has to pass. That means if you have any legislation that you want to get into law, like, this is one of the only vehicles that you can reliably use, and you have to figure out some way to then shoehorn it into national defense. Now, fortunately for people trying to do that shoehorning, our entire economy is organized pretty heavily around the military. So it's not difficult to kind of cram your whatever your issue is. They tried to put an AI legislation into this to basically say that no state could regulate AI. A federal preemption. Ted Cruz tried to put that in. You and some others, helped get that out. Now Trump has done that as an executive order instead. All right, so that's the setup. So it was on Sunday night. The House released what they said is an agreed upon text, 3,000 plus pages. Now, when we say 3,000 pages, we're not talking your typical pages. These are like, what? Seems like 50, 60 words a page. It's like college kids cheating to pad it out, because the margins are tiny, the gaps are huge, and there's lots of nonsense words in there. Still, it's enough to fill somebody's entire cubicle and then some. So the top line, $900 billion of money authorized, which is more than the president even asked for. $400 million for Ukraine. Those were the headline numbers. When you saw it come out, what were the big takeaways from you, and what are the fights that people are looking at, between now and when they try to ram it through?
Yeah, thanks so much. Well, I think the big picture is that the trend of obviously increasing military spending has not been stopped. That trend is continuing. The Senate wanted $30 billion more than the president's request, and they ended up agreeing, well, we'll give him only $8 billion more. So that trend continues. I mean, it presumably has to reach a limit at some point. We have not reached that point yet. We're inching towards that full $1 trillion just in the base budget. That this budget, of course, doesn't include anything in the intel space, or only some of the defense aspects of intel. But you have the entire intel community, which does a lot of military type operations in our country. You have the nuclear budget, and then you also have, of course, the veterans care, which is another $300 billion. All that is related to with war spending. This is just the 900 on.
Right, so if you add it up, anything related to war and the consequences of war, including care for veterans, what would you put it at now annually?
It's about 1.5 trillion.
Huh.
If you include, assuming that you think the veterans, the cost of maintaining veterans is part of war, which I think it probably should be considered that. Yeah, you're looking at $1.5 trillion a year. But here we're at just 900, 900. So not quite the full 1 trillion, which is at least a good psychological barrier we haven't crossed. But the big fights here are not necessarily the fights that pro-diplomacy people are thrilled about. You have a provision to Trump has been wanting to reduce the U.S. presence in Europe, which this could be many. It's been many who have said, well, this is because he loves Putin and Putin has something on him. But putting that aside, people who are pro-diplomacy generally want to see a smaller U.S. footprint. That's what Trump was trying to do. This bill puts restrictions on that, both in Europe and in Korea, and has particular hoops he has to jump through if he wants to withdraw troops from that area. Rand Paul yesterday put out a tweet saying that the troop levels, this is within the president's purview. He's going to oppose this. So that's an interesting dynamic. It's certainly a place where Congress is coming in and saying, when it comes to war, they're pretty unlikely to try to constrain him. It's not been the trend historically, but when it comes to reducing war, they've moved very quickly. This was a big, actually, project of Liz Cheney back when she was still around. So it's impressive that when he does want to pull back, they can act very quickly to restrict his authority. I would say it also provides all types of funding for Ukraine, obviously for the Baltics. There's a whole new initiative, the Baltic Security Initiative, and then you have money for the Indo-Pacific.
That's a little ominous. What are they? Whenever they're doing security initiatives and throwing new money at regions, oftentimes you look back a few years later and you're like, oh, okay, I see why we're at war now in this area. So what do you see going on there?
Yeah, well, this is certainly to reassure the Baltic countries that the U.S. is going to stay in the region. That that just because Trump has kind of expressed, he's basically not shown the enthusiasm for the Baltics that is typical in Washington. So this is Congress coming in and trying to signal to him, to these Baltic countries, that we have your back. We're not abandoning you, and that's really the idea. And you'll see a lot of people who will talk about the Baltics, their leadership, the percentage that they spend on their GDP. But when the U.S. comes in and spend a percentage of their GDP they spend on the military, so the U.S. comes in, gives them all types of military equipment, all types of support, which just only frees them up once again to have more money to spend on their military, also on their domestic situation. So that's, I think the bigger way that it could lead to war is that it essentially decreases the incentive of these countries to have any reason to engage in diplomacy or work out their issues with Russia in a diplomatic way, because they feel they have the military support to take a hard line. And that's the primary way that it could lead to a conflict.
Right,
but of course, if that were to happen, we'd be told it's all Russia's. It's all on Russia, even though, there is a role there in our side and disincentivizing negotiations in that way.
Right. And we understand that dynamic through the lens of Israel, too. In the Israeli political spectrum, anybody who was advocating for peace and coexistence was undercut by the United States' willingness to just spend infinite amounts of money to support a war posture instead. So if you were an Israeli politician, you said, no, why would we make a compromise with these terrible terrorists? You had the U.S. back. The same thing in the Baltics. Why would we compromise with these evil, like Russians are kind of synonymous with evil, and for some elements of these countries, others obviously are have tight alliances with them. So why would we do that when the U.S. is willing to back us up? When you withdraw that support, all of a sudden peace and coexistence starts to seem like a better deal, in diplomacy. Yep. Actually has a little bit more oxygen to it.
Diplomacy is hard. Diplomacy is tough. It's difficult.
It's unpopular.
Not easy.
You have to do
politically.
Unpopular things. Yeah. Right.
So, yeah.
So
well, that's the situation on that, and the same thing with with Korea as well. I mean, the U.S. There is a new progressive government in Korea. They've repeatedly expressed interest in working with Trump to try to tone down tensions, kind of resume the process that was taken in Trump's first term. And, but there's, of course, factions in Korea that are hard right, take the most hostile approach and, and are aligned with the U.S. security infrastructure, national security elites here. And so it's the same process where, if the U.S. is standing behind the military approach, it undercuts the potential chance for diplomatic engagement.
Right. So Marjorie Taylor Greene has already come out that she's a no on this. So what are the margins now? I can't keep up with all of these special elections and people dying, and people being sworn in or not sworn in. Also, just want to underline, if people missed this, they took, Adalita Grijalva was elected to replace, her dad Raul Grijalva in June, right? In a special election. She was just sworn in. Just recently sworn in, because she would have been the 218th vote on this Epstein discharge petition. So they adjourned Congress, stopped business, so they wouldn't have to vote on that, and that she couldn't be sworn in. On last Tuesday, Matt Van Epps beat Afton Bain in this Nashville special election. They swore him in on Friday. Friday. So it turns out they do know how to move pretty quickly when it's a Republican winning a special election. But so update me on the numbers here. So MTG is a no, and she's going to be leaving soon anyway in January. But one of her last acts will be to cast a no vote on this. So how many can they lose? And what kind of leverage does that give you and others who are trying to strip some things out of this agreed upon text? Or is it too late? This is a take it or leave it bill.
It is a take it or leave it. And I think the way that, basically that the Armed Services Committee, which is historically a very bipartisan committee, it is a very well-funded committee from the entities that, do make, hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars every year. Folks may recall that, this bill passed almost unanimously through committee. Only Ro Khanna was the only vote. And this has become a joke in the Armed Services Committee. In fact, they were chanting Ro, because they were expecting him to vote no. They're almost mocking him, somewhat playfully, but it's a little darker if you kind of see the big picture of what's really happening. So, so it is, and the typical fight for the past few years has been how many, policy riders they put in on cultural issues and social issues. And this year, they essentially toned that down a bit, which allows it to be a more bipartisan bill. Because there isn't really that much dissent on, spending $900 billion on war and whether we should, that's pretty bipartisan. The dissent is over the cultural issues. That's where the disagreement is. So from what we understand, unfortunately, Marjorie Taylor Greene, what she's objecting to is the foreign spending. She was attacking Trump, saying he's too focused abroad. I voted for focusing on America, not spending money in Ukraine, not going around ending foreign wars that we're not involved with. That was her critique. And so that's the line she's taking. Unfortunately, that's the part that she's objecting to, which is all the funding for Israel, for Ukraine, and for Taiwan, and for the Philippines, things like that. That's actually the most popular part of the bill for everyone else. So unfortunately, that does reduce her leverage in the sense that there are a large number of hawkish, Democrats who will probably cross the aisle and make sure it passes, because they wouldn't want her to be able to, her or anyone isolationist, as they would call her, to be able to block the bill. So I think, unfortunately, she has limited leverage at this point because of how they drafted the bill around the consensus issues of lots of military spending and with limited numbers of social and cultural issue riders.
So this is a wrap, you think?
I think that's what it's looking like. We're getting signals that they'll get it over the finish line, barring some unforeseen additional defections. But it seems like seems unlikely that it'll be blocked.
Yeah,
unfortunately.
Yeah, Washington knows how to get its bipartisan war spending and war authorization through. So speaking of other uphill fights in Congress, you've also been active in pushing for a war powers resolution. To try to block the Trump administration, or at least the Rubio wing of the Trump administration, from launching its war on Venezuela. What is the war powers resolution? Like, why does it have teeth? And Sorry, we got about 4 minutes to run
good.
through this one.
Yeah, well, you know, may I just make 2 quick points on the NDAA? There are 2
Mm-hmm.
positive things. One, it's arguably positive. You know, after Syria regime change happened, the sanctions have continued to strangle the economy. So now that the regime change happened, they admit, yeah, these sanctions are strangling everybody in this economy. They would never say that while they were trying to do the regime change, but they have finally lifted that after the Trump meeting with the new leader there, former Al-Qaeda guy. So they're lifting those.
So the NDAA lifts the sanctions.
It lifts
Syria.
the sanctions. So that's a good win for the Syrian civilians. It's a little darker in the sense that they only admitted it was hurting civilians once it worked. If the regime change had not happened, they would have not lifted it or recognized that the impact. The other thing it does is it does repeal this 2002 Iraq AUMF. This was the last AUMF authorization for military force that Congress voted on. It was over 23 years ago now, was the last time they authorized anything. Trump had cited it when he assassinated Soleimani. And it's somewhat of a symbolic win to take for the first AUMF to be removed. It has limited relevance, but so that's essentially brings us to kind of what the War Powers Act is and what its purpose is. This was passed after Vietnam because essentially they slowly entered us into that war, starting with advisors and then moving up the chain without any authorization. So they pass a law that allows any member of Congress in the House or Senate to force a vote within 2 to 3 weeks, depending on the chamber, and it doesn't have leadership can't block it. So currently on Venezuela, we have Tim Kaine, Rand Paul on the Senate side, and Thomas Massie, Jim McGovern on the House side, who have these ready. And if Trump does attack Venezuela, these would be ready to be brought to the floor immediately. They could also be potentially brought to the floor in advance here. So that's kind of the state of play. And I think there's a pretty good chance that they would pass, which would be a pretty embarrassing political loss for Trump, given that 70% or above of people in the country oppose a regime change war in Venezuela.
And it does seem like you could bring it up now because I've seen you point out before that the language of the legislation says that, if you've entered into hostilities, then, the clock starts ticking, and putting the entire kind of armada off the coast of Venezuela clearly is entering into hostilities, setting aside the strikes on the boats, which, they claim for legal reasons are non-state actors. But the whole rationale for it is that Maduro is a narco trafficker, and that these boats are involved in narco trafficking, and the financing then supports the narco trafficking, which is Maduro, but it's a non-state actor. It's like because it sounds like they're trying to dodge that part of the resolution. But so why don't they just bring it now? Like if they're in now, like just vote on it. And then this is the last question. Then what would be the actual teeth of it? Let's say it passes. What happens?
Yeah, so that's great question. So on the Senate side, they did force a vote earlier, and it was about to pass, but Rubio and Hegseth came to the Hill last day and said, you don't need to pass this. We're not going to war. We promise. We don't even have the authority to go to war. So then they were able to keep just enough Republicans to avoid that loss. But the way that they scrambled showed that they're afraid of a political loss. Trump is wanting to pressure Venezuela, see what can get done through pressure, but he hasn't really committed to taking major political losses, or especially on an issue that really undermines kind of the theme of his entire America First campaign. So when it comes to the teeth, that is still pretty contested and gets into some of the legalities of how it's enforced and what their strategies would be. But the reality of these things is that it's largely a very potent political symbol when you have all of, the media is going to be counting votes, going to be reporting the votes, saying Trump delivered a loss. They're going to be looking at the polling. It's going to create a narrative. For example, when Congress passed the first ever War Powers Resolution, Trump's first term on Yemen, and, Trump vetoed it, said he wasn't going to respect it. But then in the days before the vote, he ended the support for the Saudis that the War Powers Resolution had called for. So the legality is another issue, and it can be enforced, we believe, but that's still an untested legal issue. But the real impact of it is the political cost for the president, who is trying to push an unpopular war that nobody wants, and he barely may even want.
Right. Well, Erik Sperling, thanks for joining us. Where can people find more about Just Foreign Policy and follow your work?
Yeah, I think justforeignpolicy.org or justfp and on Twitter would be great.
Right. All right, Erik. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. All right. Up next will be Hussain. I see him in the waiting room here. Let me see if we can. Brad, you want to add him here? And then we're going to take a 20-second pause while Brad kind of gets. All right. I think we're good to go. Maz, thank you so much for joining me. How you doing?
Good to see you. Good morning.
Yeah. So we have about 20-25 minutes before our next guest joins us. You're welcome to stick around if you have time. But wanted to talk to you about the reporting that we've been doing here at DropSite on Jeffrey Epstein and his ties to various intelligence agencies, Israeli intelligence agencies, and the Israeli government. Kind of wanted to start at a higher level. When you went into this reporting, what was your assumption or guess about what his relationship was to the world of global intel, and how has the reporting that you've done kind of changed your either changed, confirmed, or rejected some of the priors that you had about it?
Yeah, well, it's interesting working on this piece. I think both of us are learning so much about how the world really works in a way, or how power operates outside of public scrutiny. It's funny because the whole question of Epstein and intelligence, all those words together, they inspired so much fervid speculation, and people would cast aspersions on even the idea that that's something that you should be looking into, or something that could be real, and so forth. And it was not really covered in a serious manner by the press, so to speak, or by, it's not been discussed. No one's really covered the way we're covering it right now. So when I first thought about that, it wasn't really clear what that meant, or how much people were exaggerating or conflating things and so forth. And what does it mean to have ties to an intelligence agency exactly? What would that look like? Did Jeffrey Epstein work for the Mossad? Was he 007 for the Mossad? Were those the allegations and so forth? I think that through the reporting we've done so far, and we have a lot more coming, including this week, we should have some good stories coming out on the subject. I think it's very clear that Epstein, he was sort of above and beyond that a little bit. Like, we think about the world in terms of states and institutions and agencies and so forth. And that's true, and that's a very important part of understanding how things work. But there's another separate sort of center of power, which are these parastatal networks of individuals, wealthy individuals, billionaires, people based all over the world, different parts of the world that they draw from, and who, in many cases, work in tandem with one another to pursue shared interests. And they are a significant influence on global politics, the global economy, and so forth. But they're not something that, really shows up on the map. And they're not really covered in a systematic way by the mainstream press, which tends to focus on institutions and covering the actions of institutions. So Epstein, like, I think we say this a lot, but, it's not like he worked for the Mossad. It was more like Mossad worked for him, if anything. He was someone who had a relationship with senior Israeli political and security figures. They had plans to effectuate certain ideas for economic gain and to pursue the political and security interests of Israel. And they would deploy these Israeli intelligence-linked firms, private firms, to help pursue that. And those deployments would later blossom into formal security arrangements signed by the Israeli government. And we've covered that, me and you, Ryan, in Cote d'Ivoire and Mongolia and other places as well. So I think that, we've learned a lot, not just about his own ties, but how Epstein as an individual helps explain the world a little bit. He explained how things work, how these powerful networks of people operate, and the role that they play in global politics, beyond public scrutiny.
Yeah, when it comes to forming a new understanding of the way that states operate, there's also something interesting in the way that within the political kind of spectrum or structure of Israeli politics, he seems, pretty firmly ensconced in the like remnants of the Labor Party there, like the whatever label you want to put on that, but hostile to Likud. Not really any different when it comes to Gaza or the West Bank. But when it comes to some cultural issues within Israel, or just other atmospherics, just a different political faction within Israel, and like more like almost like I'm not to say mortal enemies, but like the animosity is intense. In fact, it's so intense that Netanyahu just recently shared this Jacobin article that had a summary of our reporting at Drop Site, connecting Epstein to his Israeli intel, because it did damage to his political rivals within Israel. He was willing, has so much animosity toward his rivals inside Israel. He's willing to do significant damage to Israel's, international reputation in order to hurt the local domestic reputation of his rivals, particularly Ehud Barak and his allies. Yet at the same time, Barak was able to, when he was out of power, present himself and be understood around the world as a representative of the state of Israel, and was able to, work with his allies back in the government and the intel agencies to further that impression. And in the case of Cote d'Ivoire, Mongolia, some others that we'll talk about in future articles, his private business dealings while he's out of power lead to security agreements with the actual state of Israel, even though it's in the hands of his supposed adversaries. So how does that whole kind of formulation make you kind of think about the nature of states and the actors who control them differently?
Well, I think Israel is a very important sort of example because it's clear that the line between public and private sector is quite porous, especially for these lifelong military and intelligence political figures. There's another gentleman, Yossi Cohen, who was the head of Mossad until recently. He's doing a book tour at the moment. I read his book, and you can look at his public statements and so forth. It's clear that despite the fact that he's nominally a public citizen now, he's doing messaging intended to further the security interests of the Israeli state. And he may go back into politics as well, too. So Barak was someone like that as well, too. He was part of this revolving door between the public and private sector. But his public sector activities, such as they were by no means diverted from his idea of what pursuing the security interests of the Israeli state were. They were, synonymous with one another. And him and Epstein, everything they did accomplished two things. So when Barak was leaving public service in 2013 from the defense ministry, he wanted to make money. And Epstein was someone who offered himself up as someone who could help him do that. But also he wanted to make money in a way which helped, Israel's tech industry, surveillance tech industry, helped further formal security and political agreements, and he even picked up a thread of things he was still working on while defense minister and continued them on seamlessly almost when he was a private citizen nominally. So I think that, not every country is like that. Perhaps there's some countries where people do leave political life or the intelligence world and really do become completely private citizens and so forth. But Israel is a pretty small country with a small elite. It's a very mobilized society. They have a mandatory conscription. Pretty much everyone served in the military or the intelligence agency at some point. And, there seems to be that thread which remains, especially for people who spend their whole lifetime there at senior levels. So, I don't really see the things that Barak was doing outside of office as being really that different from what he's doing inside office, except that the legal restrictions on his own financial gain were somewhat loosened. And you made a really interesting point. I think it's really important what you said, that Netanyahu shared this article which he thought would wound Barak, and he frequently tries to share things about the Epstein connection to Barak, specifically to cause more damage to him. And, an outside observer would find that curious, because why is the Israeli prime minister deliberately trying to tie his country to there's a very notorious sex trafficker in the United States. They're viewing it totally internally politically. So from their view, Barack is like an extreme radical leftist, and these people were going to sell out the country and so forth. And it's not just Netanyahu. Amichai Chikli also, even before we did our reporting, he was publicly talking to Charlie Kirk about the fact that we need to know more about Barack and Shimon Peres and these guys' ties to Epstein. We want to know more about that. As a Likud guy, he thought that was something that should be published more. Of course, from an outside observer, the average person is not delineating between which party and which faction is really politics. They just see it as the Israeli government, the prime minister, and the defense minister. And I think that's kind of probably the right way of looking at it. But yeah, it does tie very deeply into this. And I think that generally speaking, what these emails show, and it's kind of like a high level conclusion, but it seems very much that Epstein was wedded into this network of individuals that spanned the Israeli Labor Party, probably the British Labour Party as well too, and then the Democratic Party in the United States. And from Netanyahu's perspective, he views himself as being persecuted by the liberal deep state. That's kind of his way he views his current corruption trial and the broader themes in Israeli politics and the role he plays in that. So he thinks he's fighting the deep state. He thinks that these revelations about Epstein, he's favorable to them. And Netanyahu himself is kind of like the Republican congressman from Israel. That's the way he portrays himself. So if he can use this to stick it to the libs, in his view, Epstein and Barack were the libs, that's something beneficial to him. Of course, I think it's very short-sighted, but perhaps he will pay attention to more of our reporting.
Right. It's selfish and short-sighted, but it's his self that he's concerned about and always has been. So, from that perspective, it's understandable. I wonder if we wanted to put in the most charitable light his interpretation. Like, he has certainly gone to war with what you would call the Democratic. Let's think of it as a Democratic deep state that encompasses, the Democratic Party and its allies in intel here in the United States, and the Labour Party in Britain and its allies within its intelligence community, and then Ehud Barak and his allies within the intel world there, who are united by a kind of shared Davos type view of the world, and have and at least at the time Epstein died, the relationship of tech was loose, it was malleable, and it was on its way toward becoming part of the more MAGA, let's say a global MAGA coalition. But at the time, up 2000s, 2010s, tech world was kind of aligned with this Democratic deep state, that, as you would call it. Netanyahu actively antagonized that faction, by going after Obama relentlessly, trying to stop Obama from reaching the nuclear deal with Iran, routinely attacking him publicly, making a fool of Joe Biden when he came. Joe Biden came to Israel as vice president and famously was made to wait an enormous amount of time, while Netanyahu went out and just announced a whole bunch of settlements that he had promised that he wouldn't announce. Made sure to do it in the most humiliating way possible to Biden. From there, Netanyahu kind of throws his lot in with the global right. And so I wonder, is he right in a way that the faction that Epstein was a part of? Now, Epstein was a chameleon who could move uniquely among different factions. So you find him not just with Sarkozy, but also with Putin. But he's more ensconced in what Netanyahu is describing as understanding as this democratic global faction. So is Netanyahu right? Is there a real kind of conflict there, or is it smarter to just see it? No, this is just a tiny factional dispute, and really what we see is what exists.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because if one were to say that Epstein was aligned with the more nominally liberal faction of Israeli politics, would that mean that Epstein's views about the subject more conciliatory or liberal and so forth? I think not necessarily, because because Netanyahu, in a way, he sees himself as an insurgent against an establishment. And maybe that was true a few decades ago because, Epstein was in his late 60s when he died. Most of his life, the Labor Party, that wing of Israeli politics was more predominant. They were the strong horse in Israeli politics. They were the Israeli establishment. And the revisionist Zionists like Netanyahu, while they certainly had an influence in the state, they did not have the hegemonic role that they have today. So Epstein's alignment with Barak and the Democratic Party's alignment with the Labor Party in Israel, it was sort of natural in a way, because if you want to have a say and influence in Israeli politics, then the person you want to talk to is someone like Barak, someone who was a prime minister, a Labor Party figure, Shimon Peres, and so forth, people like this. So I think that, effectively, Netanyahu probably sees himself as an underdog against people like this. He saw Epstein and Barak and people like this, his tormentors who kept out the true Zionists, the revisionist, patriotic Zionists, like he was.
Bill
Now,
Clinton.
like the Clinton, exactly. From the perspective of 2025, and that's very much like Trump sees himself, by the way, as well. He sees himself as persecuted by a very powerful liberal establishment, although he himself is, of course, an elite himself in every way. But Netanyahu has the same sort of yeah, exactly. He has the same persecution complex towards these people. I think in an alternate timeline where the revisionists, the right-wing Zionists have been more predominant throughout Israeli history, throughout Epstein's lifetime, you could have seen Epstein form a relationship with Netanyahu instead of Barak, because that was where the power was, or would have been the power would have been. His relationship with Barak seemed to be just less ideological and more opportunistic, in the sense that this is someone who, at the time was very influential in Israeli politics and may have continued to be influential. And if you want to have a say in Israeli politics, that's who you should talk to. It seems since the time period of these emails and since the time period of like last 2 decades, people like Barak have become more and more irrelevant to Israeli politics. They become like a small, divided, dwindling faction. They're sort of demographically older as well too, where all the extreme right-wing energies more towards the young people as well. So I think that Epstein's ties to Barak, they're kind of a relic of that period. And even if one were to say, like, people reported about this, that Noam Chomsky was talking to Barak and Epstein, things like this, in the context of Israeli politics, it might have made sense to Chomsky, because he's talking to the people who, the more, in his view, were the more reasonable people in Israel, and they were keeping the extremists like Netanyahu at bay. And one can, quibble with that and say there was not much difference. I think this kind of, at this point, revealed to be true. There wasn't much difference, but that would make sense why they had those interactions, and why even Barak and Epstein would discuss Chomsky's articles, which are critical of Israel, in a relatively favorable light, or hearing him out and things like that. But Israel's changed a lot since that time. The political landscape has changed, and now Netanyahu is hammering Barak with Epstein. And it kind of doesn't make sense why he's doing that, because Barak is really not much of a threat, and the Labor Party itself is not really much of a threat to Netanyahu at all. The real threat to him probably comes from even further right.
In a moment, we'll be joined by Asem Alnabih from Gaza. And if you feel like sticking around and you have time, feel free. But I did want to ask you before you leave for a little preview on the piece that we're going to be publishing over at Dropsite today. Let me see if I can throw up this this element on the screen here. Did it go up? No, I don't think so. Hold on. There it is. So this is from when Epstein died, and all of a sudden people start really paying close attention to this. The public realizes, wait a minute, this guy was really close to Les Wexner, one of the wealthiest pro-Israel billionaires on the planet, and the former head of limited brands, which included Victoria's Secret, Abercrombie and Fitch, Bath and Body Works, and he was helming a lot of his money. People said, wait a minute, this is very odd. Somebody needs to explain this. So they did what they called this independent review that went over a lot of internal documents to try to figure out what exactly Epstein's role was with Wexner's money, particularly his charitable money. And as you can read on the screen here, they say, although Epstein held the title of president of the Wexner Family Financial Office that performed the accounting and payroll functions for the foundation, we found, quote, no evidence that Epstein played any significant role in these functions or that he personally supervised them. For example, he did not personally perform any of the accounting functions for the foundation and did not make decisions regarding the foundation's use of funds. So what's useful there is that is a, and Brad, you can take that one off. Let me see if I know how to do it. That is a pretty direct declarative statement. He did not make decisions. What can we say now, having looked through a lot of his emails from his Yahoo inbox that we have access to?
Yeah, it's rare that you come across a formal report and statement like this that's so obviously untrue or so obviously can be disproven. Because, the story we're writing, which is forthcoming this week, talks about Epstein's role in the Wexner Foundation. And the Wexner Foundation is one of the preeminent, most powerful donors to pro-Israel causes in the United States. You could say it's one of the most important Israel lobby organizations in the U.S. And Epstein was not only, involved in it as a trustee, it seems like from the correspondence, very strongly, he was the final say on the way money moved and decisions were made for investments and so forth. And, this tranche of emails we'll be reporting on, it's from a certain subset of his life towards the later end, around the time when his sex trafficking conviction, the first one, started to come to light. But he was very closely involved at that time, even beyond, in managing the Wexner Foundation's money. So what this suggests is that, Epstein was probably one of the most important figures, you could say, in the Israel lobby in the United States, because he had the control of the purse of this many, many billion-dollar fortune, this extremely powerful foundations, these very Byzantine web of entities, financial entities, and holding companies and so forth. The money is being moved around in huge quantities and being deployed for the benefit of the pro-Israel cause in the United States and supporting Israeli interests in the United States through the auspices of this foundation. So, the claim made there that he had nothing to do with it and he had no role and so forth is just so flagrantly untrue. And our story is going to talk about that. And hopefully in the course of reporting the story and several other stories, it will also help explain the very vexing question of, where did Epstein's power come from? Who did he work for with? What were the origins of his influence and so forth? It's very much tied to his relationship with Leslie Wexner and his control of this foundation through the power of attorney that was granted to him in very mysterious and as yet unclear circumstances by Wexner. And, the claim that he had nothing to do with it in that report is just it's laughable. And I think that the Wexner Foundation has been under continued scrutiny over ties to Epstein. And that report they did to kind of clear themselves, it really does not tell the story at all. And I think there needs to be greater accounting for this. But yeah, I think that we will see more about that in our story. And I hope that through unpacking it, we'll be able to get closer to a full understanding of the origins of Epstein and how he became this incredibly powerful figure that he was in the United States and globally.
Yeah, just putting up one, just for fun here. Just if people don't believe us that that this is a flagrant lie and just untrue, here's a classic example of an email that comes to Indik, who is Epstein's personal lawyer, but also a lawyer with the Wexner family, and he immediately forwards it on for Jeffrey Epstein's approval. And in a lot of cases, you have the kind of accountants telling Indik, "Hey, ask Jeffrey about this." So just like you can look at the language of that independent report, compare it to the actual everyday practices of the foundation and the family money, and conclude that was just flatly untrue. And so, maybe we'll get another Wexner review, because they now need to review how that review came to be so flagrantly incorrect, because it's not just off by a little bit; it's just black and white incorrect. So, two things happened: either the independent review attorneys just lied. It's extremely unlikely. Like the kinds of attorneys that you hire to do these things, they're hired because they have the credibility with the courts and with the public to look at the documents and report on them honestly. Like there's an entire industry of these attorneys who do that. So I am highly skeptical that they had the access to the messages and the information that we have now. And when they see that, I think their own professional credibility is on the line. And I think, like, they themselves, I think, would need to review what happened here. How were we lied to here? Like, how did we miss this fundamental role he was playing?
Absolutely, it's stunning, and we wouldn't even know this without having these leaked emails from his inbox. But it was a completely false version of history was entered into the record through that study. Sorry, to the review. It's very important, and I think that one thing for listeners' context as well too, that these are individual transactions of hundreds of thousands of dollars, or millions of dollars, or tens of millions of dollars. The Wexner Foundation between 2003, 2018, sorry, they gave upwards of $125 million to pro-Israel organization in the United States. Tremendous amounts of money were moved around at this time. And it's not that Epstein had involvement in all of that, but his ties to the foundation go back even before 2003. So, these are not trivial transactions or trivial sort of dealings. The snapshot that we give shows his intimate involvement, but it's in a much broader machine that he was helping operate, or operating at the top in many ways. So, yeah, I think that it's incumbent upon them to do a real review if they want to have transparency and win back public trust. But also, it's important for people to know that this in one individual about whom we're trying to learn more at the moment, Epstein, he was an extremely powerful player in shaping American views of Israel and the U.S.-Israel relationship on many fronts, politically, in an intelligence capacity, through his relationships, but also financially through his ownership, or sorry, not ownership, but the power of attorney over this extremely important fortune. And these emails, they're a glimpse of a much broader phenomenon of which we still need to know more, whether through government disclosures, whistleblowers, or whatever else it is, to understand just how much influence and power Epstein wielded through this fortune.
Well, thank you, Maz. So up next, we're going to be joined by Asem Alnabih, who I believe is in the waiting room. Brad, if we can bring him in, then we'll kind of have to move some screens around, and then we'll take a very short break. Asem, welcome. Brad's going to arrange a few things here so we can get set up, and then we'll be good to go. All right, there we go. Well, Asem, you're former spokesperson for the Gaza government, now a journalist with Al-Arabi TV. Where exactly are you joining us from today? And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me for the first time. I would like to thank you for your support, for your efforts to show the truth in Gaza and Palestine. I'm talking to you from Gaza City, an old city, a wonderful city that has been under siege for decades now from the Israeli government. And this lovely city has been destroyed in the past 24 months by Israel. I'm talking to you while a lot of people, hundreds of thousands of families, are staying in tents without any basic services. I'm lucky to stay in a small room with roof and the top of me, while thousands of people, 10,000 of people, who lost everything during the genocidal war in Gaza.
I was thinking about that last night, because it's about 2 days ago here in Washington, D.C., the furnace broke in our house.
I can't hear you.
Oh, let's check your audio. 1, 2. You're not hearing any. 1, 2, 1, 2.
Okay.
Let me here. I'll keep saying something
Will
until
you go and come again?
So try now. Maybe Brad, what do you think? We should bring Asem back in and see if that fixes it, because he could hear before. All right, here we go. All right, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. How's that going? Can you hear us yet?
Yes.
Coming through now. Okay, so what I was saying is that I live in Washington, D.C. And it's one of the coldest days we've had here in a very, very long time. About 2 days ago, our furnace stopped working, and so the house has plummeted in temperature. But I was, as the kids and I are like kind of suffering through this, I was thinking we have walls, we have a roof, we have blankets, we have a lot of dry blankets, and we can put the dry blankets on top of us, and we're going to be fine. And we know, hopefully today, somebody is going to come and work on the furnace, and it's going to start working again. And this will be a brief 24 to 48 hours of inconvenience, a little bit of shivering, and everybody's going to be fine. It's almost impossible for me to conceive of what people who have been in tents for this long are going through as the weather is changing in Gaza now. What is it like out now? I know there's rain coming, rain expected, and how are people just not completely losing their minds?
Look, Ryan, I think we need to take a full view to what is happening in Gaza right now. Talking about one aspect will not show the truth about the unbelievable circumstances in the city.
Mm-hmm.
So we can talk about the cold, that you might suffer from the cold, I might suffer from. But we are talking about people who have nothing, literally, with zero basic services. And they are staying in tents for the third winter.
Yeah.
It's not the first one or the second, the third one, with almost damaged tents. We are talking about, low quality tents that might be useful for a few times, for a few weeks, not for, more than 2 years now. And the infrastructure of the city have been destroyed. More than 200,000 meters, 200,000 meters of the solid of these sewage treatment networks have been destroyed in the city. More than 100,000 network and pipelines of water pipelines in the city. This is only in Gaza City, while double or triple of these numbers in the Gaza Strip. There are more than 250,000 tons of solid waste accumulated in every corner in the city. So when we want to look at the weather, the bad weather, we need to take the full view of the circumstances. And those people with this damaged infrastructure, they have nothing. They lost their shops. They lost their income. They lost their savings. They spent their savings for 2 years without any income and without any basic services in all aspects. So when the bad weather attacks them, it really suffers. So that's the truth right now. And if we want to add the heavy bombardment,
I lost him for a second. And there has been some heavy bombardment recently throughout Khan Yunis and elsewhere in Gaza, as Netanyahu seems to be attempting to fully break. He has not been abiding by the ceasefire. An average of 2 children have been killed every day, 2 Palestinian children every day in Gaza during the quote unquote ceasefire. He's also targeting a group of fighters who are from Al-Qassam brigades trapped behind Israeli lines in Rafah, in a complete inversion of the idea of a ceasefire, that when you reach a ceasefire with a group of militants, that's the end of it. Everybody goes home, and it honors the ceasefire. That's why you negotiate the ceasefire. You don't continue fighting just because you have the opportunity to kill people. The whole point of the ceasefire is to end that. And so this is what he's referring to here is quite real. The fire has not ceased. So I lost you just as you were saying the ongoing bombardment.
Yeah, Ryan, I would like to apologize for this bad connection, but also again, I
don't think it's your fault.
I am lucky to have a room to have some electricity to charge my phone and laptop, but as I said, the majority of people here in Gaza are suffering from, the basic. They don't have electricity. They can't charge their phone. They don't have access to the internet. They don't have enough water. There is, they can't feed their kids the insufficient amount of food. So I apologize about this bad conditions, but we blame Israel for all of that.
Yes, I don't think you need to apologize, but yes.
So back to what I was saying about the general situation. So it is unbelievable circumstances. Yes, Israel has succeeded to stop the war on television, on social media, on the media platforms. But the bombardment and the war is still ongoing on the city. We can hear the strikes. Every day there's casualties, maybe not that much during the 24 month of genocidal war, but it is still ongoing in the city. And that's add on all of the suffering that people are facing right now. Bombardment, in food security, food insecurity, water scarcity, damage to the infrastructure, huge damage to the infrastructure, roads, pumps, water wells, all of these civic facilities have been destroyed during the 24 genocidal war. So now the people, those soft people, are facing this heavy crisis without any help. Israel just say that we provide people in Gaza with their needs, but I am here, and the NGOs, the UN associations, the local foundations, all of them mention that what is entering Gaza right now is not enough, is not sufficient. There is no enough fuel to operate the water wells and the sewage pumps to just to help the people, to provide them with a sufficient amount of water. So all of these circumstances now happening in Gaza while people have nothing. They just wait. They expected something after the announcement of ceasefire, but unfortunately, nothing happened.
So we reported on the purposeful destruction of Gaza City's sewage treatment plant by the Israeli forces as they withdrew, as they were reaching the ceasefire deal. They did as much damage as they could to the sewage treatment plant. What is the consequences? Just is solid waste just building up throughout the city? Like how is this being handled?
Okay. Now in the city, as an engineer, I was working in mobility as an engineer. I can tell you it is a strategic destruction in the infrastructure. Sometimes I was visiting some places and some sites, and I was thinking why they destroyed this place. There is no reason to bomb a water well, for example. But they destroyed more than 75% of the total water wells in Gaza City. Some of them got destroyed 2 times. Like during the war, we rebuild it and we maintain it. Then they came back again and destroy that water well. Also, in the pumps, the sewage treatment pumps, we have 8 sewage pumps and treatment plants in Gaza City. 100% of these pumps got destroyed, partially or totally. Some of them are now totally not working. We can't maintain that pumps like the main one in Sheikh Ajlin in the western part of the city, and because of that, the municipality now pumping a huge amount of sewage, untreated sewage, to the sea. So can you imagine what is the crisis that people will face in the future in terms of water quality, even the underground water, what is going to happen, and the beach and the environment at all. So Israel was trying to make Gaza City a livable place. They destroyed everything, almost everything, not only housing units and houses, homes. They destroyed water wells, public parks, libraries, roads, squares, sewage pumps. More than 60,000 trees uprooted only from the streets. We are talking here only about the trees in the squares, the main squares, and the streets and roads. So can you imagine how many trees that now will affect the environment in Gaza? So all of those crises now among this lovely city and the small city, while we have good engineers, we have good workers, and we would like to rebuild our city, we would like to reconstruct it. And based on the ceasefire agreement in last October 2025, Israel agreed to provide Gaza with its needs, like the basics to provide people with the civic facilities, services. But I confirm, and all the news from the local municipalities confirm that nothing entered, while in the past 5 days, the Gaza municipality stopped its service of collecting the solid waste from the hospitals because they don't have enough and sufficient amount of fuel to operate their heavy vehicles to collect the solid waste from the hospitals.
Alnabih spoke with us recently and suggested that as you think about entering the third winter here, his assessment was that Israel is trying to make conditions so miserable this winter that a sufficient number of Palestinians just give up and just leave, and especially if they say, okay, people were hanging on for a ceasefire and a light at the end of the tunnel. Now there's a ceasefire, but there's no light at the end of the tunnel for the suffering. And so if he's going to open up the crossings and say, okay, you want to leave, you can leave. So what's your take on that analysis, that what's going on here is a deliberate immiserating of the population to try to effectively drive them out?
I want to be clear about that. I think the first option for Israel is genocide. Second option is forcing people to leave the strip. But I think they want to kill the souls of people. They killed already more than 70,000. And I think the number of casualties is more than that number.
Right.
Because we need to do real studies about the accurate number of people who were killed during the genocidal war. But again, every Gazan has the right to decide for his interest. I mean, we have thousands of people who deserve to get a good treatment outside Gaza. I mean, there is a lot of, people who like cancer patients and other. But again, we need our right to come back to our city.
Mm-hmm.
We have many good students who got already their offer.
It looks like he paused for a second, but what he was alluding to there is the number of Palestinian students who have, in unimaginable circumstances, managed to graduate high school, keep their studies up through two plus years of genocide, and get accepted to a college or university somewhere outside of Gaza, as almost every university there. There's still many of them are still operating remotely, but the actual infrastructure and the buildings have been completely annihilated. But thousands of Palestinian students have been accepted to universities and colleges around the world, and at least here in the United States, thanks to Laura Loomer in particular, they've all been blocked from attending. Although hopefully some will still get visas and get through, but they also need to be able to get permission to leave from Israel, and it gets into this contradiction. I think Asem is back. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
All good. So you were just talking about the students.
Yes, I believe that.
You know some students who
many
have been accepted. And what are the circumstances? They have to get the visa from the country that they've been accepted into, or where the university is, but then they also have to get permission.
I am a PhD researcher. I came back to Gaza only 2 months before the war.
Oh wow!
And my family were outside. My wife and 2 lovely kids were outside Gaza, and I can't meet them now for more than two years and a half because of Israel. I can't meet my lovely daughter because of Israel, because my family can't get in and I can't get out. Like I'm stuck here. But again, we need to think of the Palestinian in Gaza as a human, as a normal people. What we are calling for is freedom of travel, freedom of movement,
right?
Freedom of going out and come back. I believe Israel is planning something. They want Gaza City empty, whether they would kill us all or they would force us to leave the city. I think they have many plans, but also I believe that as a Palestinian, we will stay in our city because they tried the harsh way of killing us. Mm-hmm. They tried to force us to leave our city. But you remember that in the last month of genocide, more than 300,000 people stayed in the city, and they refused to leave the city. And I was one of them. My family was one of them. My father, my mother, my sisters, my brothers, and my family decided that we would not leave our city, despite that we had the possibility to leave. That we had right. A few amount of money to pay to go to the south, but we decided to stay. And 100,000 actually decided the same, because we can't leave Israel to take our city. And now it's the world and the leaders of the world to take their turn and to take good decisions, at least after our sacrifice that we paid for our freedom. They should take the right decision right now and give us our basic rights as a humans based on the international law. We are not asking for something special, just to be treated like any human around the world. But back again to the, to the travel. Netanyahu stated something 1 week ago, and he said we will open Rafah border just one way for the people who wants to leave, but we won't let anybody to enter Gaza again. So that looks like a very clear plan. He's not hiding anything.
Right.
He's telling the truth that his plan is to force the people to leave the Strip. And Egypt decided that no, we won't open Rafah border unless you accept and agree to open it on the both sides. So who is suffering here? The people of Gaza.
Right.
The politicians around the world, they just argue about their opinions about the political issues, but the people in Gaza who are suffering and are still suffering. I mean, so we need to think about people here. And we need to look at their needs right now. Yes, their basic needs is a tent, a new tent at least, and sufficient amount of food and basic services, like drinkable water. But also they want their basic human rights. And that's what I'm calling for. That's what my friends, my family, my community, my people in the Strip, we need our basic services. We need our basic rights, but also we need our basic human rights like everyone around the world.
Well, awesome. Couldn't agree more. Thank you so much for joining us, and look forward to having you back anytime.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank you and your audience for your beautiful work for Gaza and Palestine.
You're too kind. Thank you. That was Asem Alnabih, a journalist with Al-Arabi TV, former spokesperson for the Gaza government. As he said, a PhD candidate. I hope he is able to continue those studies. I'm Ryan Grimm from Dropside News. On behalf of all of my colleagues, thank you so much for joining us on the live stream this morning.